and get started. So this is the Let's Chat series from Local Motion, formerly known as PedNet. Welcome. This will be the MRT Advocacy Across the State presentation. And we have one more person joining here. My name is Jackson Hotaling. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator with Missourians for Responsible Transportation, or MRT. And welcome to the presentation. So during our presentation, we'll be covering a few different topics related to MRT's work in different communities across the state. We'll talk first a little bit about who we are. So who is MRT? We'll talk about what we offer, the kinds of things that we're working on, specifically with our current projects, and what's next. And then if you all have any questions, feel free to chime in at any point, especially because I'll be talking about a lot of different kinds of topics, ranging the gamut of the things that we're working on. Feel free to jump in at any point. So, Missourians for Responsible Transportation, our mission is to lead in fostering strong communities by aligning advocacy efforts for streets, roads, and trails that work for all Missourians. Our vision is to have a statewide transportation system that is fiscally responsible and allows all Missourians to travel safely and independently. But who is MRT? So that's what we're interested in, but it doesn't just start with us. We're formed by 4 independent organizations back in 2018. So each of these organizations was in a different part of Missouri. They were focused on similar kinds of things. So transportation equity, sustainable transportation options for folks that can't travel from one place to another in the city. So these organizations were based in Kansas City. So it's Bike Walk KC, Local Motion, formerly PedNet Coalition here in Columbia, Ozark Greenways down in Springfield, and TrailNet in St. Louis. So the 4 of them came together because they really wanted to have, kind of a twofold. They wanted coordination. So they wanted to actually have a greater access statewide and to be on the same page about different things that will impact all 4 of these groups. They also wanted to reach the rural areas. So places that wouldn't traditionally have, like groups from different cities coming in, telling them what to do. They wanted to have a different organization that could talk about these kinds of things, but engage more directly in rural areas rather than being tied to a city. So really the focus of MRT and these other 4 organizations is improving transportation equity across the state. So that's a little bit about MRT. This is really who we are right here. On the left here, you'll see Ron and I. We are the 2 employees of MRT. But it's not just the 2 of us. It really comes down to, we're a network of professionals. Between these 4 organizations, there's about 30 or 40 staff members. We cover so many different topics. We're focused on education, we're focused on policy, we do events and everything in between. So different ways that we could engage with citizens, teach folks about transportation issues and get them involved. So we have a membership base of a few thousand people across the state at least. And it's really just down to these 4 organizations plus our umbrella, MRT, coming together to make it happen. So, we are recognized for some of the work we do, which I'll talk about during the presentation, but we've been able to be invited to different speaking engagements. We've spoken at national conferences. We've spoken at statewide conferences. We've gone down to local chambers of commerce and other city meetings. So we've done presentations in other states as well. And, we've been able to be a part of some different projects related to some of the work that we're doing. So we've been able to get our name out there, but it's really not about us. It's about the places that we're working in. So as of now, since MRT was founded in about 2018, we've more or less worked with 25 different communities across the state directly on different grants and other projects to improve the transportation networks in their communities. So, you might recognize some of these. A lot of them are consolidated in this area here. This is within one specific regional planning commission, and that's something that we've really found is working regionally. So with a few communities in the same area has gotten some really good results. But we work elsewhere as well, focused on different kinds of planning, educational opportunities. But within each of those communities, it comes down to the people that make the decisions that we have to connect with. Because we're based in Columbia, it's not as easy as just coming down and telling people what we think is best for them. We don't know any of that. We need to learn from the folks that are having these conversations, the folks that are getting together. And often what you might see in any of these communities, really, there's probably some restaurant or coffee shop somewhere in the mornings before people are going off to work. People every morning will get together with their friends around a table and having conversations about the day. So, they might be talking about, personal things, they might be talking about the weather, but these are the folks that are coming together in each of these smaller rural communities and, keeping the conversation alive and talking about the important things. So in lots of cases, these are the people that we have to reach if they're making the decisions. So that's really something that we're cognizant of, and we don't want to speak from a pedestal. We want to speak at their level. So we want to be at the table with them. We want a seat at the table. But to get there, we kind of have to understand a few things about how to communicate and how to work together on things that we both probably agree on. It's just a matter of how to actually work through that communication. So one thing that we want to understand is some of the common themes that exist a lot of, or across many of these communities that we're working in. There's a struggle. I've been on a call today, for example, where tourism was a big focus and discussion, but at the same time, we could bring other people in, see it from a tourist's eyes, or we could focus on improvements to citizens that are living there now. So, we see the money outside, we want to attract that, but how do we also make it better for citizens here? That's a big theme. Another one is brain drain, is the phrase that you might hear, talent retention within the communities. A lot of younger people might not, see a life for themselves in a smaller town. I moved away from my hometown, so it happens. But it's really about younger people moving to bigger cities, and how do we correct that? How do we identify and address the reasons that people are leaving, and how can we make sure that folks can stay in their towns, make them great for the next generation? As far as some of the work goes, there might be a disconnect between interest groups. So certain different groups have competing ideals, or maybe don't get along on a personal level. And any of things that cause that kind of disconnect end up harming the work that they're trying to accomplish. So it's hard to work together when you can't find common ground and even having a conversation. So that's something that we see from time and time again, especially in smaller towns, when you're seeing the same people every day. There are disagreements at some points, and it's hard to overcome those. Something, however, that we've noticed is that there's been a huge increase in interest in trails and using outdoor space in general during the COVID-19 epidemic. We've seen this nationwide, but even here in Colombia, and we've heard anecdotally from a lot of rural areas. And as far as the Katy Trail goes, average, they have something like 400,000 visitors a year. It sounds like last year there were about 700,000. So there are indicators showing that because of COVID-19, there's an increase. So we really need to, capture that interest and direct folks towards, towards improving on that. And on top of all of that, there's highways that have been coming through, harming downtowns across the state and across the country for decades. A lot of the businesses closed down in favor of a Casey's General Store or something on the edge of town by the highway. But the bones are still there. A lot of these buildings still exist. I included this photo here, the Landmark restaurant. This is in Lowry City, Missouri, population something like 900. And that is basically the business in downtown Lowry City at this point. The shell of a grocery store that closed about 8 years ago is still there. They still have stuff, shelves and things like that. And there's a attorney's office or something like that. But really, this is the restaurant. This is what is keeping downtown alive. And it's where the old men at the table are still meeting. So we want to, harness what's still here and work through that to make stronger communities down the road. That's really something that we're thinking about. But like I said before, we need to really focus on how to engage in order for us to have strong results. Basically, this is something that Ron has come up with that, I'm newer into this role. I've been able to see how he's been able to communicate and work through talking with different community leaders. And it's something that I think is a really effective method. Personally, I've lived in China before, there's certain things that maybe I wouldn't be able to communicate with folks in rural Missouri, but it just comes down to respect, understanding, and trust. Really, if you're able to get through those things, then you will be able to communicate. You'll be able to find a way to find mutual interests. You'll find a way that isn't just discounting somebody for their beliefs. But if you ignore these things, it'll have pretty strong negative outcomes. You won't be able to connect in the same way. So we just have to understand that before we make any conclusions, we really have to focus on building relationships in the places we're working in. We really want to listen. That, I think, before I started this role, that's what I've heard is the most important thing we can do. We need to listen. Through listening, we'll be able to learn. But basically, if you do those things in the bottom of the pyramid here, building relationships, listening and learning, you'll be able to get to those conclusions. And if you do it through a group process, you'll be able to come to those conclusions together and be on the same page. We try to avoid making any conclusions or any judgments without understanding the full picture, without meeting people from different groups and trying to really have a full understanding of what's going on. So when we do that, trust is built, understanding happens, and respect is earned, not just from our end, but we get their respect as well, and that's really important. So what that translates to as far as MRT's work, we do lots of different kinds of things. We are more or less a one-stop shop because, like I said, it's not just Ron and I doing all the work here. It's not just two people going into a small town and trying to make all this happen. it would not be possible, the kind of work that we do, if we didn't have that network of other professionals like Bike Walk KC, like Local Motion, TrailNet, Ozark Greenways, and the other organizations that we are in contact with daily, and state entities, things like that, that really help to make all of this possible. So one thing I'll talk about later, but one of the things we offer are trainings with our partner organizations. We do creation of certain documents that will help communities, for example, with grant proposals. So we'll do walk audits, action planning documents. We'll bring our connections, between communities and our partners. So that respect, we'll have planning support available, education, technical assistance. And complete streets is a big focus of our work. So Columbia has a complete streets policy, but a lot of rural communities don't even have, a lot of basic kinds of policies that you might have, just because there is not a large municipal staff. There aren't people that have been focused on these kinds of things before. So we'll talk quite a bit about complete streets, or streets that are, take into account all users on the roads. So not just for cars, but for bicycles, for people walking, people in wheelchairs. We have a complete streets policy template, and in that template, we'll be able to help communities really input their own information and make it unique to them. But we have a structure that has been helpful, and we've been able to pass about 5 or so different complete streets ordinances across Missouri. We'll also provide other talking points and help communities build their own coalition, so they could keep up this momentum and translate that to real infrastructure improvements down the road. We also make the communities we're working with, like if we find a grant or other funding opportunity that might be helpful for a certain project, we'll be able to talk them through that. We'll get communities in touch with other communities, organizations, or individuals that might be able to help them improve their own transportation situations. We'll also work on some communications initiatives. So how can we tell the stories of people in these communities? How can we make folks at MoDOT aware of these kinds of things? And, we'll influence the places of influence. So we are involved in local things, like I'm here in Columbia involved in the as a bike and pedestrian commissioner. So I was appointed to that commission so I could understand the process and be a part of it, so I could inform that for the work that I'm doing in other areas around the state. We're also involved in statewide coalitions as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. But basically all is to say that we do all this work, we focus on community engagement, we make these connections, but really a lot of it is so we could help move the needle on some specific projects we're working on, and so we can make the connections for future projects that translates to real improvements in the active transportation networks and public transportation networks throughout the state. So these are some of the main things that we're focused on. We are focused on the Hands-Free Coalition. So that's what I'll talk about first. That's a coalition that we helped to create that is involved in distracted driving legislation. We're also involved in the Rock Island Trail campaign, so I'll talk about that as well. Missouri Livable Streets, that's a different coalition, public-private partnership. And we do some other things like trainings, like I mentioned before. And there's an AD grant, or anonymous donor grant, called the MRT Community Advocacy Project. And that's what I am involved in directly. So let's get started. Probably one of the biggest, most important things that we're hoping to get passed within the next year or two is distracted driving legislation. So Missouri is one of 2 states without any kind of distracted driving or texting while driving law. Montana is the other one. However, about 47 or so % of Montana residents are covered because Montana allows for local cities to create their own ordinances. So Helena, Butte, like some bigger cities might have distracted driving legislation. Missouri made it so we cannot have distracted driving legislation within our cities. So basically, if you're over 21 years old at the current law, you're legally able to text and drive. That results, as studies have shown, a lack of legislation, and increased deaths and crashes. So that's one of the big things that we're focused on and communicating with legislators to try to change. So we are not finalized with this mission yet, but this is a mission of our coalition, which is made up of more than 30 partners across the state. So our tentative mission is to eliminate distracted driving related injuries and deaths on Missouri roadways through policy, education, and collaboration. So some of the partners that are helping to make this possible, you see the MRT and the 4 partner organizations here on the left, but we have, automotive companies, General Motors, hospitals are involved. Here's the Columbia Police Department logo. Other cities such as Joplin and Jefferson City, the mayor, Carrie Turgeon, she's very involved. Some regional planning commissions, other state entities like Missouri Department of Transportation and Department of Health and Senior Services. So we have quite a group. It's amazing coming together for our calls, just as a group and within our work groups as well, trying to make real change in the next couple of years, hopefully. So our 3 work groups are Capitol Lobby, so focused on the lobbying aspect. So AAA, for example, is heavily involved in that process, and their government relations folks are connected with us, trying to make lawmakers aware of this policy. We also have data and education work group. That's more for general education. They've worked on some incredible PSAs. And the victims advocacy work group. That is a work group focused directly on communicating with victims of crashes related to distracted driving. So we do Capitol Lobby Days. We'll all go out there to the Capitol. This photo right here was from a day that AAA hosted in April. And that is a crash in St. Louis County that a car was involved in with distracted driving. We're also doing certain things like high school outreach or working with MoDOT through their Buckle Up Phone Down Day that they had a week or 2 ago. And I'm not going to show you this next video. It is very difficult to watch, but I encourage all of you, if you get a chance. The data education work group came together and created a video with Adrienne Siddons, who was the wife of a MoDOT employee who was actually killed in Colombia by a distracted driver. So if you're willing and able, I strongly recommend watching it. It's difficult to watch, but it is an incredible video that our coalition helped put together. And yeah, so it's just something I wanted to mention. But be cautious, it's not easy to watch. All right, so the next big project that we're working on is the Rock Island Trail campaign. So Ron here, who's on the call, he has helped to chair the campaign, and he is involved with the other campaign cabinet members. Basically, the teal color here is hopefully a future rail trail, just like the Katy Trail and a spur that goes up to Kansas City. Our goal with the Rock Island Trail campaign is to attain financing and have the state parks accept this corridor, which is owned by Ameren, as a future trail. And something we're really excited about, something that will directly benefit Columbia down the road. And once it's completed, it will be a 450-mile loop around the state. So there's nothing else like that anywhere. It will be huge for Missouri, and it's really exciting. So just a little bit more information. Like, we've raised about $1 million as part of the campaign so far. And we're looking for other funding opportunities, federal earmarks. And State Parks is committed to the project no matter what. So if we don't reach the deadline, which has been a struggle because of COVID-19, they're committed to extending the deadline if necessary. And we believe that the state legislature is mostly on board. If you'll see in this picture, these are different legislators that are, or that have districts along the trail. And we were able to bring them together, give some information along with Missouri State Parks Foundation, Missouri Parks Association, about the trail, and people were very interested. We got some real positive response from that. And it's cool to bring different legislators with different priorities on something that they all share common ground on. So it's been a cool process, and we've been able to get involved with quite a few of these folks, providing information and letting them know, about the process. So just something I included for fun. As part of the work, I've been able to visit a lot of these areas. Over a weekend, a few months ago, I had the opportunity to travel across a newly completed segment of the Rock Island Trail, which connects Kansas City to the current spur that exists. So these are just some photos. Just within the last year, more trail has been opened, more people have been out, more access is available, and we've seen some incredible results because of that. And these are them. It's just such a beautiful area. The current Rock Island Trail that exists goes through several different small towns. So this is Pleasant Hill, and it's a small town, a couple thousand people, but they have protected bike lanes, and they have a protected bike route from one trail to the Rock Island Katy Trail spur. So it's pretty amazing to see that. It's cool to see what's happening and how communities are really grasping onto that. And in some of the communities that we work in that are directly on the Rock Island Trail or on the Katy Trail, they're trying to integrate that more into their own planning. So it's incredible to be a part of it, and to see people that might not be interested in this kind of stuff kind of start to get it. It's a fun process. So here's another project that we're involved with. One of the other real big longer term projects that we're working on is Missouri Livable Streets. So it's a public-private partnership founded in 2010. So there's state organizations, local organizations, private groups, businesses, and other citizens that are interested in the mission and vision that Missouri Livable Streets is focused on. A big part of that is complete streets. So Kansas City, St. Louis have complete streets policies, but across the state, about 40 or so communities have complete streets policies. So almost half the state's population is living within a community that has a complete streets policy. And each year, more communities are taking that initiative. So the mission of Missouri Livable Streets is really focused on that. It's just trying to provide leadership and resources that support accessible multimodal transportation across the state, with the goal of having a Missouri where all citizens have access to safe, affordable transportation systems that enhance their quality of life. So what does that really look like? This is something that the advisory Council for Missouri Livable Streets is working on. We're trying to make active transportation a central focus for the state, something that we could also collaborate on with neighboring states. For example, most of the neighboring states of Missouri have active transportation plans. Missouri does not have an active transportation plan. Bike Walk KC, our partner, has been involved in Kansas and their update of the active transportation plan, which originally was created in 1990. So it's something that, like, how can we collaborate? How can we learn from neighboring states and what they're doing and bring those kinds of things to Missouri? So one of those goals that we have is to educate key influencers and decision makers just about the importance of active transportation. So through different communications projects that we have, different events like that. We want to make sure that active transportation is used as a key strategy to address major issues. There are basically every issue is connected in some way to your transportation access. So, having healthy food, maybe you can't get there if it's 10 miles away. So how do we navigate that? Employment opportunities. You can get a great job, but if you can't actually get there on time for some reason related to transportation, that's something we want to address. People aren't always struggling because they want to. They're struggling because of systemic issues that exist, and that's something that as a group we're really trying to work towards fixing. The last one here, supporting investment in infrastructure. So anything related to livable streets or complete streets, as they're also called. Like, if we can actually make real infrastructure improvements, that will have a positive impact, as we've seen across the state in different specific projects. So something we're working towards. And if you're interested, we have work groups as well for Missouri Livable Streets. So we have an advocacy work group, education work group, funding work group, and partnership work group. So any of those are really to help with the mission. We meet quarterly as an entire Missouri Livable Streets community, which is pretty exciting. So another project that we were able to undertake this summer as part of a grant that we have through the CDC and administered by Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services is called Active Living Communities of Practice, or ALCP. So we did 3 different trainings, I believe, if not 4. So the 3 big ones that I was able to be a part of were in Kansas City, St. Louis, and Columbia. So basically, we're able to bring communities within different cohorts of the grant, of the ALCP grant, to one of the cities that they wanted to visit. And we showed them real infrastructure on the ground and how it's used. So in each of these cases, we were actually able to take bicycles and try it. We were able to walk in certain areas, and each city offered their own things. So I could go a little bit through what we were able to do, starting with Kansas City here, because it's really exciting. We had folks from Joplin and Clinton and some other smaller towns come up to Kansas City. We took them on a very new cycle track, so you could still see the paint, where they marked the yellow, or the chalk where they marked the yellow lines here. This was just opened very recently. And we were able to try a cycle track on the electric bike share bikes that Kansas City has. We also were able to try this exhibit here. It's called the Home Street Home exhibit. And that's something that has a lot of information, and it's available for different communities to borrow. So it's really just talks about what a complete street is, what it looks like, why they're important. And it's something that any community, if they wanted to borrow it, can contact Bike Walk KC. They could actually go and take it to a library or a community center and set it up. So Paula here, who's in the photo, we were able to actually, she was interested in this display. We were able to set it up in their community center for 2 weeks in Clinton, Missouri. So exciting thing, exciting outcome from this training. And we've heard a lot of positive reception about, ideas that even though these projects are in big cities, like it's things that could be implemented in any town of any size. If you have an intersection, there's something that you could, look at for potential improvement if it's dangerous. So the next training set here, this is St. Louis. St. Louis had some really interesting things. I grew up in St. Louis area, so I'm very familiar. But even then, I think I was able to focus in a different way through this kind of a training. Something I didn't see when I was growing up are parklets that are starting to come in certain areas of the city. Basically just a couple parking spaces if you can give up, which you can, because there's going to be a huge amount more parking available than what's used for public space. So you could see the bike racks here that we were able to use. And there's a ramp that goes right up to some seating in the parklet itself. So that was really fun to actually try out. I've never seen anything like that in St. Louis before. And it is across from a coffee shop. So, people are able to just go sit down and enjoy themselves. It's not just limited to the coffee shop. It's open for anybody. This is also downtown St. Louis. So by the Arch, they opened up in the last year or two a cycle track that we were able to ride. And this is some specific St. Louis infrastructure here. This is so, people aren't making right turns. They're called sleigh balls, named after Mayor Francis Slay. Basically, they are huge concrete balls that cars will crash into sometimes when they are going to make a dangerous turn. So it's a unique thing to St. Louis because they're used all over the place. They've closed lots of streets down and blocked off certain traffic, which has had interesting implications. But so we kind of talked about like the positives to it and also some of the negative aspects. And here in Columbia, you might recognize some of these spots. Local Motion was able to take us through a bike tour. We were able to ride around town. It was a lot of fun. We had a big group. This is the biggest group that was able to come. So here you'll see some folks from Versailles, some folks from MU came around and other communities across the state. And they were able to try our Giving Rides bike, so learn about that program that Local Motion offers. You'll see our bike racks here were super packed because we were able to, bring our bike fleet in. So we had 15 or 20 people with us. And we were able to go to City Hall. We were able to go along the MKT. And here we have Richard Stone, who is with the City of Columbia. And he's telling us about some of the positive and negative things related to the infrastructure here. So it was really cool to see him be a little humble, saw something that didn't work so well, but also talk about different things that Columbia is involved with, what the crossings are like, and we were able to actively use those, which was fantastic. And here's the last project that I'll highlight as part of MRT's work. Like I said, this is what I'm directly involved with. So this project, we have a grant that will help us connect with 10 different communities across Missouri. 9 of them are actually within one regional planning commission. So that cluster that I showed at the beginning of all our communities, a lot of them are based there. And that's been really helpful because we've been able to work with one regional planning director to help us connect with certain individuals in different communities and get that conversation started. So different kinds of things we'll do include walk audits. We're actually beta testing an app for Local Motion that will help us identify and use across the state for different sidewalk issues, issues with bike lanes or crossings, that we can take a photo of, document where it is, add in notes, and have that information to go back and actually kind of determine where some of the biggest high priority areas might be. So here I was able to make a quick map of some of the places that we looked at by using the map. Each dot is an entry of data that was able to pull together and see which roads might be a little more dangerous, some things that were good, and kind of see where we needed to focus our efforts. So with that, we'll actually go out into the communities. We'll meet with real people. Here's Sheridan, who I mentioned. She's the executive director of Case-and-Joe Basin Regional Planning Commission. And through that partnership, we've really been able to learn so much about regional planning commissions and how, as a region, communities are able to work off of each other and benefit the whole, which is awesome. You'll also see Ron here, actually trying out the infrastructure that exists, demonstrating and feeling that it is not comfortable to walk in mud along the side of a busy high-speed road. But you can see that people are doing it because that's the only option they have. So documenting these kinds of things, showing the right people that need to see this, how people are doing it, even taking the right people to these areas that they might not be visiting. That's the kind of stuff we're doing. Because you might end up having to go to the hospital. This is in Clinton as well. And the only way to get there is by a street that doesn't have a crosswalk, doesn't have any kind of pedestrian or bicycle infrastructure, and is across a major 65-mile-an-hour highway. We just need to communicate that those kinds of things are dangerous. They could lead to fatalities. And if we have more infrastructure that focused on active transportation, then the whole community will benefit from more than just one way. It's financial, health related. There's a lot of reasons to consider this kind of a project. So with that, just to kind of recap and share about where we're going, some of our big goals. We really want to get a Rock Island Trail. We really want to make sure that happens, continue working with state parks. So that's something that we're working tirelessly and feel excited about. But until it happens, we're still going to be involved. We want to get distracted driving legislation established. So if that's something you're interested in, if you could help out with either of those projects, that's really something we're looking to do in the shorter term. Longer term, we're working towards, with Missouri Livable Streets, to develop an active transportation plan, something, like I said, Missouri doesn't have. And more generally, we want to advocate for any kinds of trail connections or active transportation, multimodal projects that exist across the state. And we really want to focus on equity, making sure that everyone has access to these options, and not only wealthier communities, not only in certain areas, but across the board. So I said a lot of words. I would love to hear if anybody has any questions about the work that MRT does, where we're headed, anything I might have missed.
Jackson, I have a question. In your opinion, why should people from Local Motion or in Columbia care about what's happening in rural areas around the state?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's a lot I could say about it. Some people might think that Columbia is a little island, but it's not true. We're connected to rural areas pretty close to us, and way down the line. So people are coming in from across the state for work here. People are connected through Mizzou that live in rural areas. It's not like we can just exist as a little island and not recognize that we are a part of a bigger picture here. So we need to kind of bridge that rural urban divide. That's something that, I've tried to work on, being from the St. Louis area for a long time. Like, I might have a certain perception about how things are, how they go, but there's things that rural areas have that urban areas can't. There's things that are special to rural areas that urban areas just don't have an opportunity to even know about. So we need to understand that, it's two different cultures in a certain sense, but we're within the same state. We're working on this together. We're impacted by the same governor's decisions. We're impacted by just overall everything that comes together to make Missouri, Missouri. So especially with the bicentennial coming around, like, we've been able to have a reminder about the heritage, about the history of the state. We just need to know that we're interconnected and we can't exist as an island. We need to exist as the whole.
Hey, Jackson, I have a similar question as Ron. What benefit do you see coming to Columbia by you all doing your work out in the rural area?
Yeah, it's a good question. Longer term, I think if I could say some specific projects that I've mentioned, if the Rock Island Trail is created, there will be a direct connection that will have financial implications over the long term for Columbia. Creating a loop like this is going to attract people from everywhere. The last 3 groups of people I talked to when I last rode on the Katy Trail out west a little bit, I talked to people from New Mexico, Buffalo, New York, and San Diego. And like, they came to Clinton and they came to Windsor. So it does have a financial implications. As far as hands-free goes, Columbia is not allowed to have distracted driving legislation. Randall Siddons was killed because somebody was distracted driving in Columbia. And that's going to continue to happen at an increased rate because of the lack of legislation. So it's really something that is necessary at this point, something that 48 out of 50 states have. So that's the kind of work that we're trying to accomplish. But also, like, bringing folks to places like Columbia, they can learn from us and we could learn from them. So through our trainings that we've done, like, we've been able to make some real strong connections. And down the road, we might need something from Versailles. We might need to learn about something to help improve the city here. So making those connections is really important as well. Any other questions?
I'll ask one more, Jackson. Let's hypothetically say that the Rock Island is accepted by the Parks Department and MRT counts it as a win, and next legislative session, a distracted driving bill passes. Those would be 2 huge advocacy wins for MRT. What would be the next advocacy strive that MRT might look at in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like, as a nonprofit, our goal is to run ourselves out of business. We want to make sure that we accomplish our mission, and that's what we're working towards. Because if we don't, then what are we doing? But the nature of these kinds of issues is it's more of a mind shift than anything else that needs to take place for major changes to happen. That's what we're working towards. Like, we could work on specific projects, but we really need to make the connections that we're making over the long term to, influence folks on why it might be important to, for MoDOT to consider certain kinds of projects, over the long term. So with things like developing an active transportation plan, that could take years. With that passing, though, there might be greater interest and greater curiosity about more of these kinds of projects. So as long as there are communities in Missouri, there are going to be improvements that need to be made. We just want to be a part of that starting now. Any other questions? All right, well, if there's no further questions, really appreciate you all for coming. Thank you to Gabby for helping to organize this on behalf of Local Motion. Thank you to Ron, who's my counterpart here at MRT, for being here, supporting, helping me to learn and understand all this kind of stuff, and to our partners and everyone else we're involved with. So it's been a lot of fun, and appreciate you all for coming out.